In engineering, there's a strange moment when something looks almost right, but not quite. It's familiar enough to recognize, yet different enough to feel wrong. That feeling isn't curiosity, it's discomfort. And in the world of military power, discomfort quickly turns into fear. In the early 2010s, the global defense world was calm, almost smug. The rules felt settled. The United States owned stealth technology, not shared it, owned it, full stop. At the top of the pyramid sat the F-22 Raptor, a jet so advanced it was never exported to a single ally. Below it was the F-35 Lightning II, the most expensive weapons program in human history. Trillions of dollars, decades of research, hundreds of contractors, millions of lines of code. This wasn't just a fighter jet, it was a flying symbol of Western technological dominance. The assumption was simple. No one else was even close. Not Russia, not China, not anyone. Then, in September 2012, that certainty cracked. Grainy photos began appearing online. Low-resolution images taken by civilians near an airfield outside Shenyang, China. At first, analysts shrugged. Bad angles. Camera tricks. Maybe a modified prototype. Nothing serious. But then more images appeared, and suddenly, denial became impossible. A sleek, twin-engine fighter was in the air, and it looked wrong. Not crude, not experimental. Familiar, uncomfortably familiar. The shape was the problem. This wasn't a rough imitation or a distant cousin. To the naked eye, it looked like it belonged in the same family as the F-35. Same stance, same proportions, same predatory smoothness. It was like seeing someone wearing your face in a crowd. Inside Pentagon briefing rooms and Western aerospace offices, the reaction wasn't excitement. It was silence. Then unease. Because this wasn't how progress was supposed to work. China, just 20 years earlier, had struggled to build reliable jet engines. And now, suddenly, a fifth-generation stealth fighter, something the US had spent decades perfecting, was flying over Chinese soil. This wasn't just another prototype. This wasn't even just another jet. This looked like something that wasn't supposed to exist. Once the initial shock faded, the debate began. Some analysts tried to calm the panic with a reasonable argument. Stealth aircraft, they said, are shaped by physics. Radar waves don't care about national borders. If two countries are trying to solve the same problem, how to avoid detection, then naturally their aircraft will end up looking similar. Biologists call this convergent evolution. Sharks and dolphins look alike, not because they copied each other, but because water rewards the same shapes. At first glance, that explanation sounded comforting, but it didn't survive a closer look. Stealth design isn't just about smooth curves or angled wings. It's about thousands of tiny decisions, many of which have multiple possible solutions. And that's where the discomfort returned, stronger than before. Start with the DSI inlets. These are the air intakes that feed the engines, carefully shaped to hide the spinning compressor blades from radar. There are many ways to design an intake. The FC-31 didn't just use a similar concept, it used nearly the same solution. Then there was the diamond-shaped nose, optimized for radar deflection while still housing sensors. The forward-hinged canopy, designed for both stealth and pilot visibility. The internal weapon bay layout, arranged to preserve a clean radar signature. Even the serrated edges on the landing gear doors, tiny sawtooth patterns that break up radar reflections. Details most people would never notice. But stealth engineers notice. In aviation, nothing is decorative. Every line exists for a reason. Every panel gap is a compromise chosen after endless testing. Seeing the same compromises made, again and again, told a story that physics alone couldn't explain. This wasn't just two teams reaching the same destination. It looked like one team had already seen the map. That realization changed how the aircraft was perceived. The FC-31 was no longer just a Chinese stealth fighter. It became a message, a silent one, but a loud signal to anyone who understood the language of design. This aircraft wasn't saying, "We learned." It was saying, "We already know." And once that thought took hold, attention shifted away from the sky, towards something far darker and harder to see. Once suspicion set in, the conversation changed direction. Analysts stopped asking how the jet flew and started asking how China knew what to build. Because in the 21st century, the most important battlefield isn't in the air. It's in servers, cables, and data centers. Modern weapons aren't designed only in wind tunnels anymore. They're designed on computers, millions of simulations, millions of lines of code, and that makes them vulnerable in a way older weapons never were. This is where cyber warfare enters the story. The F-35 program was the perfect target. It wasn't just one airplane, it was a massive international project involving hundreds of contractors spread across multiple countries. Each contractor handled a small piece: radar, software, materials, avionics. Together, they formed an enormous digital ecosystem, powerful but porous. Starting in the mid-2000s, U.S. intelligence agencies began tracking a wave of coordinated cyber intrusions, later linked to campaigns like Titan Rain. These weren't random hacks. They were focused, patient, and strategic. The attackers weren't stealing credit cards. They were harvesting blueprints, test data, and design logic. And the scale mattered. This wasn't a folder or two slipping out the back door. Investigators believed terabytes of sensitive data were taken. That's the difference between stealing a photograph and stealing the entire film archive. According to later reports, the stolen material allegedly included things that can't be reverse engineered just by looking at a jet on a runway. Things like the chemical makeup of stealth coatings, how radar systems filter noise, how heat is managed so engines don't glow like beacons to infrared sensors, where sensors are placed and why there instead of somewhere else. In other words, not just what the aircraft looks like, but how it thinks and survives. This is why analysts began talking about digital DNA. The idea that the FC-31 wasn't just inspired by the F-35's shape, but by its internal logic. The invisible decisions buried deep inside files that never appear in public photos. Suddenly the timeline made sense. The jet appeared in 2012, but the knowledge that shaped it may have been taken years earlier, quietly, file by file. The aircraft may have first flown over Shenyang, but its ghost had crossed the Pacific long before. There's a dangerous assumption people make about technology theft, that once you steal the plans, the hard work is over. In reality, blueprints are just promises. They describe what to build, not whether you're capable of building it. Aerospace engineers have a name for this brutal gap between theory and reality. They call it the Valley of Death. It's the long, expensive phase where designs break, materials fail, and prototypes embarrass entire teams. This is where most aircraft die, not in combat, but in development. The FC-31 walked straight into that valley. On paper, it looked like a fifth-generation fighter. In the air, its weaknesses were impossible to hide. The biggest problem was the engine. Early prototypes relied on the Russian RD-93, a reliable but outdated power plant originally designed for older fighters. It could lift the jet, but it betrayed it. During public flights, the FC-31 left behind a thick trail of black smoke. That's not just ugly, it's deadly. Stealth aircraft aren't only hiding from radar. They're hiding from heat sensors and human eyes. That smoke signaled inefficient combustion and a massive infrared signature. It was like wearing camouflage while carrying a lit torch. To observers, the contradiction was glaring. The jet looked futuristic, but it behaved like something from the past. The People's Liberation Army Air Force noticed too. When the time came to choose, the PLA said no. They had already committed to the larger J-20, and the FC-31 offered no clear advantage. It was underpowered, dependent on foreign engines, and lacked a defined role. For a program that had caused global alarm just a few years earlier, this rejection was humiliating. The message was clear. China had the skin of a fifth-generation fighter, but not the heart. And for a moment, it looked like the story would end there. A bold copy exposed by reality, quietly fading into irrelevance. But instead of collapsing, the project disappeared from view, and in silence, something began to change. After the rejection, the FC-31 didn't vanish because it failed. It vanished because it was being rebuilt. For nearly a decade, the program went quiet. No flashy announcements, no dramatic rollouts, just engineers working through the unglamorous problems that stolen data couldn't solve. This was the slow, painful part, where shortcuts stop working and real capability has to be earned. The airframe was reshaped. Subtle changes were made to the fuselage to improve airflow and reduce drag. The structure was strengthened to handle higher stress. Manufacturing tolerances tightened, because stealth doesn't forgive sloppy assembly. A gap the width of a coin can turn an invisible aircraft into a radar target. But the real breakthrough came from inside. China poured enormous resources into developing a domestic engine suited for a medium-weight stealth fighter. The result was the WS-19. Unlike the smoky Russian engines, this one was designed from the start for low observability. Better materials, better cooling, cleaner exhaust, more thrust. This changed everything. With the WS-19, the aircraft could supercruise, fly at supersonic speed without using fuel-hungry afterburners. That matters because afterburners are loud, hot, and visible from far away. Supercruise means speed without shouting. It also meant the jet finally matched its appearance. The skin and the heart were in sync. Then strategy intervened. As China expanded its navy, a new problem emerged. Aircraft carriers need a specific kind of fighter, compact, powerful, and tough enough to survive brutal deck operations. The J-20 was too large, too heavy, built for land-based dominance, not the chaos of the sea. Suddenly, the once-rejected FC-31 made sense. The Navy needed it. The aircraft was adopted, navalized, reinforced, and reborn with a new designation, J-35. Stronger landing gear, folding wings, arrestor hook, systems built for salt air and catapult launches. What began as an embarrassment became indispensable. At first glance, peeling back the layers of the J-35 feels unsettling. The internal layout looks familiar. The sensor placement feels familiar. Even the logic behind the systems echoes the American F-35. This is where critics stop and declare the case closed. A clone built from stolen files. But that conclusion misses the most important detail, where China chose to disagree with the original design. The clearest break comes from the engine philosophy. The F-35 is built around a single, massive engine. It's the most powerful fighter engine ever fielded, and the American bet is simple. One engine means less weight, less maintenance, and more efficiency. It reflects deep confidence in manufacturing reliability and logistics. China made a different bet. The J-35 uses two engines. Individually weaker, but together comparable in thrust. This choice isn't about copying, it's about survival. Flying hundreds of miles over open ocean leaves no room for error. If a single engine fails, there is no runway, no backup, no second chance. Two engines are insurance. If one fails, the aircraft can still limp home. For a Navy still gaining carrier experience, that redundancy matters more than efficiency. It's a design choice shaped by geography, not ideology. Some elements, however, are unmistakably borrowed. The electro-optical targeting system under the nose looks almost identical to the F-35's. The radar layout follows the same logic. These are solutions refined over decades, and China saw no reason to reinvent what already worked. But hardware isn't the real decider in modern air combat. Software is. The F-35's true power comes from sensor fusion, its ability to take radar, infrared, electronic warfare, and data from other platforms and turn it into one clean picture for the pilot. That capability comes from decades of testing, updates, and operational use. This is where the gap likely remains. China can match engines, they can match sensors. But software maturity can't be stolen outright. It has to be lived with, broken, and rebuilt over time. So the J-35 isn't a hollow clone, but it isn't yet a digital equal either. To understand why the J-35 matters, you have to stop thinking about individual jets and start thinking about the board they're playing on. That board is the Pacific Ocean. For decades, this has effectively been American territory. U.S. aircraft carriers could operate with confidence, protected by distance, experience, and unmatched technology. But that balance depends on one assumption, that no one else can field carrier-based stealth fighters at scale. The Fujian, China's Type 003 aircraft carrier, directly challenges that assumption. Unlike China's earlier carriers, the Fujian uses electromagnetic catapults, the same advanced launch system found on America's newest carriers. This matters because catapults allow jets to launch heavier, more fuel, more weapons, longer range. And the aircraft designed to take advantage of that system is the J-35. Now the conflict stops being about who has the better jet and becomes about numbers versus refinement. The U.S. operates globally. Its F-35Cs are spread across oceans, commitments, and allies. China doesn't have that problem. In any conflict near Taiwan or the South China Sea, China can concentrate its entire J-35 force close to home. This is proximity versus reach. Even if the F-35 remains individually superior, being outnumbered changes everything. In air combat, quantity creates its own quality. More aircraft means more sensors, more missiles, more chances to overwhelm defenses. And the J-35 isn't meant to fight alone. Modern air combat is moving toward manned-unmanned teaming. One crewed fighter acting as the command center for multiple drones, extra eyes, extra radar, extra weapons. China is investing heavily in this concept, and the J-35 is designed to be the brain of that network. At that point, the question becomes uncomfortable. If a copy controls the network, if it directs drones, shares targeting data, and launches strikes beyond visual range, does it really matter if the original has better software? This is where theory turns into strategy. The story of the J-35 begins and ends with a mirror. When the first images appeared in 2012, the fear didn't come from seeing a new Chinese jet. It came from recognition, from realizing that something once unique was no longer alone, that the shape of American air power could be reflected back at it. That feeling never fully went away. But the J-35 isn't a verdict on who would win a war. It's a symbol of something deeper. It doesn't mean American air power is finished. It doesn't mean decades of experience suddenly vanished. What it means is simpler and more unsettling. The monopoly is over. For the first time since stealth entered the battlefield, the United States is no longer the only nation capable of launching carrier-based, low-observable fighters at scale. The advantage has narrowed, the gap has closed, and once that happens, strategy starts to matter more than perfection. The uncanny valley still applies. The J-35 looks familiar, but it doesn't feel comforting. It represents a world where secrets don't stay secret, where digital walls can be breached, and where technological leadership is fragile. Two identical silhouettes now share the sky. One original, one twin, neither blinking. And as the next chapter unfolds, drones, artificial intelligence, and autonomous warfare, the real question isn't which jet is better. It's how long any nation can stay ahead in a world where mirrors are everywhere. If you want to understand what comes next, this story isn't finished. It's just taken off.